Today's video is brought to you by Card Kingdom, and right now you can get this sweet Scoop Soldier sticker when you order over at cardkingdom.com. Just mention in your order notes that you want a Scoop Soldier sticker when you go to checkout. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it is one of my favorite times of year, which is time to talk about the constructed impact of Magic's newest set, in this case Ikoria, and joining me today to talk about the top 10 standard cards from Ikoria is Crim. How's it going today, Crim?
It goes. I am so excited because, yeah, it's a new set. That means new possibilities. Just all the hype because there's a new set.
Yeah, I mean, new set, new possibilities, and not only a new set, but boy, Ikoria is a powerful looking set. So we have some really sweet cards to count down and talk about today. I know for me, the biggest problem was not so much getting a top 10 list together, but the big problem was keeping my list to just 10 cards, because there's a lot of cards I think could have impact on standard. And a new addition to the top 10 list this go around is we're actually going to post each of our lists in the article on the Goldfish site. I'll stick up a card if you want to take a look at it in the YouTube video. But basically what you're seeing here is kind of our combined list, but if you want to see some additional cards in our individual list, check that out as well. So anyway, before we jump into our top 10, Crim, I think you had a couple of sleeper cards you wanted to mention. What do you think that is not in the top 10, but might be a little bit underrated for standard from Ikoria?
Okay, well, before we even get into that, I think we should also mention that the tri-lands, are obviously really, really good, right? Everyone's gonna play them.
That is,
but I don't think we
true.
need to put them on the list because we just kind of know they're gonna be played. Now.
Yeah, I mean, if we did include them, they probably would be number one on the list. I think they will see more play than any other cards from Ikoria in standard, but It's a little boring to have a land cycle as a top card on the list. So they're awesome, but we left them off. But anyway, Crim, sleeper away.
All right. So there are some cards going into this new set. There's a decent amount of things that are getting kind of like overlooked right now. And like, me, initially, I was one of those people that also kind of overlooked this card. In our set of the Ancient Way, I think this card is amazing. It's +1, adds blue, white, or red, and gains us 2 life, and we can use that mana to cast a non-creature spell. -2, draw a card, and then you may discard a card. And then if it's a non-land card, it can deal its CMC to a creature or planeswalker, and then it alts for an emblem where you get to shock every turn at 6. This card is very good. It's a sleeper. I think it's gonna... Its -2 ability is amazing, as it allows us to throw away cards we're flooded with. On top of that, it ults fairly quickly. And lastly, Shevel, Bane of Monsters. It's just 2 mana, 1/3 death touch, puts a token on something, and then when that thing with the token dies, you gain 3 life and draw a card. I think this is an amazing card for 2 mana.
I like Shevel as well, actually. It's not on my top 10 list, but that's another card that I think does have some potential in standard. We're heading into a standard with a lot of just really big, massive creatures, and a 1/3 with Death Touch takes down big creatures. Also, pretty good blocker against the aggro decks, where they have a lot of like X2s, X1s, where you can just kind of block for days against mono red, and maybe even draw a card eventually. So I also think Shevel might deserve a little more credit than it's getting right now. But neither of those cards are technically on our top 10 list. So let's jump into our top 10 Ikoria cards from standard, starting with one of the best Doomblades, I would say, of all time in Heartless Act. So Crim, how good is Heartless Act for standard?
We've been sorely missing Cast Down, right? I would say so myself. Like, there's Tyrant Scorn, which is not quite the same. Like, this card seems to be amazing. The only thing it doesn't kill is like Hydroid Krasis, right? It shrinks a Krasis, and you know what, either mode you choose, like, I mean, you can still kill a Nissa land with this, but yeah, like the fact that you can just kill a creature for 2 mana, destroy target creature with no counters on it. So I think that mode is going to be extremely relevant. I mean, this card will be amazing. Unless of course everything is getting like death touch counters, trample counters, or like Vivian's tokens and stuff like that. But even then, its second mode, being able to remove a counter from like a Krasis to shrink it, is pretty major.
Yeah, I think this is just a really solid removal spell. We don't get Doomblade style of effects very often, just 2 mana, instant speed, kill mostly anything. And Heartless Act does kill mostly anything. Like you said, we'll see there are like the mechanic counters or ability counters coming with Ikoria. If those are really heavily played, maybe that could make this a little bit worse. But even in the past, like with Go for the Throat, with Doomblade, other similar spells that have a restriction that doesn't hit a certain type of card, those cards have always seen heavy play, and we need more unconditional 2-mana removal, I think, in Standard. Like you said, the other options usually have some sort of CMC restriction, killing just big things or killing just small things. This kills anything as long as it doesn't have a counter, so I expect this to be a fairly staple level removal spell for as long as it's in Standard, honestly.
Agreed. I fully agree there, because, like, I mean, Cast Down was already played, right? And there was a lot of legendaries that it couldn't hit, but this is way less restricted.
Let's move on to number 9 on our list. And I know, Crib, this is a card that you've kind of talked me into. I mean, I already liked it. It draws cards, but Slither Wisp, you're really high on this one. So tell us a little bit about this new Dimir Nightmare Elemental in Standard.
We have Simic Flash, right? But now there's a reason you can drop the green and play blue and black, because I think right now the archetype of Dimir Flash has a lot of cards going for it that are amazing, and a few of them may or may not even be higher up on this list of cards. But yeah, like, this is a 3-mana flash. Whenever you cast another spell that has flash, you draw a card and each opponent loses 1 life, and it's a 3/2. So whenever you cast, the spell doesn't even have to resolve, you immediately will draw a card and ping your opponent for 1. This is the clock. This is a way to like really pressure your opponent while also being able to refill your hand every time you cast a Brazen Borrower, anything like that, a Spectral Sailor, and then being able to drain them for 1. Like, this just does everything you want it to do, out of a tempo style threat.
Yeah, I think this card is perfectly designed for a flash style tempo deck, because what you want to be doing in a flash style tempo deck for the most part is sticking a threat and then protecting that threat. What Slither Wisp does is not only does it give you a threat. A 3/2 for 3 is fine. That's already a threat on its own. It keeps drawing you extra cards as you're just executing your normal flash gameplay of flashing things in, countering spells, casting removal spells. You're going to be doing this to draw a bunch of cards, which then gets you more protection to protect your threats and kind of snowballs from there. So I think this is perfectly designed for flash decks, and I'm even a little higher on it because of Theros Beyond Death stuff. One of the unique parts of Theros Beyond Death was like Ashiok's Erasure.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Omens.
Yeah.
These flash enchantments, which just happen to work really well with Slither Wisp. So even though your normal counter spell won't trigger this to draw a card and drain your opponent, your Ashiok's Erasure will, and maybe your normal Preordain or Ponder wouldn't, but your Omen of the Sea will. So there is a lot of synergy for this card in Standard.
Yeah, and just a quick note, this does not work the way you think it does with Leyline of Anticipation.
I made that same mistake. I wanted to build the Leyline deck so bad, but yes, Leyline lets you cast things as if they had flash, but does not technically give them flash, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Alright, let's move on to number 8 on our list. And speaking of flash, we have maybe a piece of this new Dimir Flash deck in Durge Bat. And honestly, I know it's on our top 10 list, but I kind of consider this card a sleeper too, Crim. I have not heard too many people talking about Durge Bat. If anything, I saw like a Reddit post with people like, oh, if I was going to make a constructed playable version of Durge Bat, I would like lower its mana cost and do all this stuff. I like, hang on a second. Like, Durge Bat is actually a really legitimate card as it is. So, Crib, tell us a bit about Durge Bat.
Durge Bat, a 2-mana, 2 black with mutate for 4 and black, flash flying. Whenever this creature mutates, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Or planeswalker. This is an amazing card. At the very least, it's a 4-mana 3/3 with flash and flying, which is already great. If you get to swing with any of your creatures, let's just say like a Spectral Sailor or something like that, or even your Slither Wisp, and then you mutate this on after as a combat trick, this card does so much work. I think people are really not like valuing or like are undervaluing how good this card is for a 6-mana mutate, attach this on, kill a creature or planeswalker.
Yeah, I really love that casting it normally as just a 4-mana 3/3 flash is probably going to be pretty decent against some aggro decks where you can probably, even though you're not technically triggering the mutate removal mode, you can probably flash it in like eat a creature if you need to. And then later in the game, this is sniping Nissas and Teferis and huge mutate piles. It got instant speed while also adding a threat to the battlefield and maybe triggering some of your flash synergies we're talking about. So I think this card is going to be very strong, not just in flash style decks, but I think even just like mid-rangey style decks that can use the mutate mode. Very powerful effect.
Yeah, I think if you're just playing a deck with creatures and you can play this color, you pay the color, you just play it, right? It's just, why not, right? It has flash. That's so good. I think this card, for me, this was not a sleeper just because it just it's so amazing on paper. I don't think it needs anything else, right? If it were any cheaper, this card would be insanely broken.
Well, let's move on to number 7 on our list. And here we actually have 2 cards. So on each of our individual lists, we had an Ultimatum at number 7, but we each had a different Ultimatum. And you can probably guess which one Crim's is. Crim, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Ultimatum choice, Inspired Ultimatum?
Well, I was inspired to choose this one because this I feel like is a kind of like an ultimatum that people are sleeping on, right? I think this one is probably, if not the best one, like the second best one in Standard, because the deck that can play this, right, is usually a Fires deck or maybe Jeskai Control, which means we have Teferi. Teferi can turn this into an instant speed thing, which is amazing, but on top of that, this just being able to gain 5, deal 5 to any target, and then reloading, this is a little bit like Sphinx's Revelation for me. I like this. This is a big control finisher that we've been lacking. I mean, I think this card is great in Standard.
I think Inspired Ultimatum has potential to be pretty good in Standard, but personally, I'm even more hyped for Ruinous Ultimatum. I've had a lot of success casting Planar Cleansing in our current Standard format just because you have like Planeswalkers, you have really powerful enchantments like Wilderness Reclamation, Fires of Invention, obviously strong creatures, you have artifacts like random food tokens that are really important, Witch's Oven. There's a lot of different permanent types that are really, really strong in Standard. And while getting rid of all creatures with something like Kaya's Wrath or Shatter the Sky is great, Ruinous Ultimatum, much like Planar Cleansing, gets rid of everything. It doesn't matter what powerful permanence your opponent has. Ruinous Ultimatum is going to answer that, and for 1 additional mana compared to Planar Cleansing, and also, of course, a more convoluted mana cost, needing double red and double black, but you don't have to blow up your stuff. And there have definitely been times when I've had to kind of think twice about casting a Planar Cleansing. I'm like, yes, I do really need to get rid of that, but I have some stuff that I like that I'd rather not blow up. Ruinous Ultimatum just gets around that. So I feel like the fact that this hits any permanent type and doesn't harm your stuff actually gives it a chance. There is a bit of a concern that I don't know how good the Mardu colors are going to be. That's my biggest concern. I feel like the power level is there. Is there a Mardu deck to take advantage of it? That we might have to wait and see on. But if there is, I feel like Ruinous Ultimatum, some sort of Mardu mid-ranger control deck, can be a really powerful finishing type effect for a deck like that.
See, that's pretty much where I'm at. Like, is there a Mardu deck? And like you had mentioned, if there is, this is obviously very powerful, but it's 7 mana and, you know, like it's not like any of the green ultimatums where like, you know, like you have ramp. The Jeskai version, the reason why I like it is because it's usually played in a controlling deck, right? So you usually get to the late game. But this is just like a fancy board wipe, and I'm not really sure how good it is if Mardu itself isn't good, right? So this is just entirely dependent on Mardu, but if not, this is a card that I plan to like fetch out of my sideboard or something with Fae of Wishes. I think a Fires deck can definitely play this because it already played Planar Cleansing before, but like out of the board.
Yeah, and this is a Planar Cleansing that isn't going to blow up your Fires or whatever, and I think that is probably the biggest difference between these two cards. Inspired Ultimatum does have more ready-built homes in Standard compared to Ruinous Ultimatum, so I think your pick is definitely the safer pick. If the floor is much higher, I think, because you already can just stick this in like Jeskai Fires and it's going to be really good. Ruinous Ultimatum, I think maybe the ceiling is even higher than Inspired Ultimatum, but there's a chance that Mardu deck just doesn't develop, and then I look silly for adding it to my top 10 list.
It's okay. It's a cool card. It's a very powerful card.
Well, let's move on to another cool card and another very powerful card and maybe the best uncommon from this set, Parcel B. So when I was looking over the mutators of Ikoria, this one kind of like flew under the radar for me at first until I was really going through the entire set and I was like, wait, this is just 2 mana to mutate? You can put this on like an Abrial Grazer and then wait, the ability draws you a card no matter what? Like if you hit a land, it goes on the battlefield, but if not, you're still drawing a card. And this has 4 toughness, so it just like stonewalls aggro threats. What is there not to dislike about Parcel Beast? It seems so strong to me. But Crim, what do you think about this little uncommon mutator?
I think this uncommon mutator is absolutely bonkers, like you had mentioned, because it costs 2 mana to mutate. And like that activation ability, like you had mentioned, it's always value, right? So now, because of something like this, I am now looking to play more geese, I guess, again, like more of the Gilded Goose or whatever, and a Boreal Grazer, so I always have a 1-drop, so I can curve right into this. This card is Simic already has tons of ways to like ramp and get value, and this just makes it even easier. The only question is, it's a little bit tight on the lists right now. Like, you have to figure out what needs to go for this to be in the deck. But yeah, like you had mentioned, this is a 2/4. So if I get to curve right into this after a 1-drop, this is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, this might be the card that actually makes me play Abrial Grazer. I have kind of this love-hate relationship with Abrial Grazer, but this card might actually make me put some Grazers in my deck, because like you said, having this come down on turn 2 is really powerful, and it generates a lot of value over the course of a long game. So I think Parcel B is going to be really good. There is, as you said, a question of what you're going to cut from the list, but I think that maybe it's just so good that it'll push something out once people figure out what it is.
Agreed.
Let's move on into our top 5. Number 5 on our list, we have a pretty ridiculous enchantment. I think for Standard in specific, I think I'm higher on Song of Creation than you are, Crim. This is one that I had ranked really highly, but I'll let you go first. What do you think about Song of Creation specifically for Standard?
Well, okay, so Song of Creation, 1 and Temur colors. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Whenever you cast a spell, draw 2 cards at the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. Every day, I keep reading this card, and it goes lower and lower on my power rankings for Standard. Like, by the time, when we initially sent these lists, this was a little bit higher, and by now, I feel like this may not even be on my list. Just because, I don't know, maybe this is a card that I'm going to complain about in a week or two, but like Narset is running rampant and all over the place. On top of that, this really requires you to have a deck that maybe like Phoenix? Phoenixes are still legal. So like if there is a deck that can really take advantage of it, it's probably that. But I don't know. Or do we have enough things to really take advantage of this card, Song of Creation? Because we have to dump our whole hand.
So for me, obviously, I'm going to discount Narset a little bit. Narset does wreck this card, and if Narset is seeing super heavy play, a card like this does become a lot harder to play, although good news is we are closing in slowly but surely on the rotation of Aura the Spark, so even if that's a problem right now, it won't be like 6 months from now. But what I see in Song of Creation is a card that takes advantage of a lot of the mechanics that we have in Standard. I think the way to get the most value from this in Standard, where you're probably not going to immediately win the game with this card like you might in some older formats, but in Standard, I think cards like adventure cards, adventure mechanic, where you can kind of hide them away in your exile zone to avoid discarding them. Jumpstart mechanic, escape mechanic that can allow you to cast things from your graveyard. I feel like you can play this, get a bunch of value out of it, make an extra land drop, draw some cards, and then have yourself set up so even though you have to discard your hand at the end step, the next turn you cast your whatever adventure card from the exile zone or jumpstart something, and then you draw 2 cards, and then suddenly that value chain starts spiraling again. And those 2 cards you draw, let you cast more spells, which draw you more cards, and you just kind of do that every turn until you overwhelm your opponent with value. And I think the reason I'm especially high on it is I feel like it just slots into Temur Adventures. I think I would probably play this over Escape from the Wilds, in all honesty, in Temur Adventures, and I feel like it just naturally fits what that deck's time to do. So it has, in my opinion, a ready-built home in Standard, and it just has a lot of potential. Like, all the text on it, outside of discarding your hand, is just very, very scary and can generate a ton of value.
I can see this card being great if like this is turn 14 and we've done the 1-for-1s and we've emptied our hands, right? But like what the early turns where this just sits and stays in your hand, just like the downside of just dumping your hand and then like your opponent going Teferi, bounce that, or like, okay, Elspeth Conquers Death, exile this. Well, all right. Cool. Cause the adventure decks, you have to be able to fire off your granteds, right? And granteds cost 4 mana, and you have to fire off all these adventures in the time before you have to discard them all. And then let's say you do, and then this gets bounced or answered or dealt with, or just any minor inconvenience, you just threw away the rest of your cards.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is true. There is a downside there with discarding your hand, and that downside is even worse if you play this and then your opponent Teferi, Narsets, Elspeth Conquers Death. There are ways it can go wrong, but if you untap with this, you're gonna have a really good turn.
Yeah, like this is one of those cards where just like the floor hurts. The floor really hurts on this card, right? Like, I think it's a little bit scary. I don't know if I like the risk on it. It's just because there's so many ways that you can, right now in Standard, that you can interact with this and make your opponent just throw away their hand.
Well, let's move on to number 4 on our list. We have another enchantment, but this one, the floor is much higher, I would say. It's really hard for this one to go wrong thanks to cycling, and that is Shark Typhoon. So, Crim, where are you Sharknadoing in Standard?
Whatever deck that can cast this, I think, in blue, it's so good. Like, it's whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying, right? Where X is the spell's converted mana cost. It's not even like instant or sorcery. So, like, there will be games, because where Standard is right now, there's a lot of mid-range and whatnot, where this will just be a 6-mana enchantment that we're gonna cast, right? But, on top of that, it cycles. And it cycles for X and 1 and a blue. And when you cycle it, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. This is extremely relevant because Teferi Time Raveler. Cycling gets around the whole you can only cast spells on your turn. So this can snipe a planeswalker, which is relevant. It flies, so that means you can maybe snipe a Brazen Borrower swinging in or anything like that. And that's the huge draw. For like, this feels like it's good at all phases of the game.
Yeah, I think it's that flexibility is really what makes this card. There are going to be games where it just sits on the battlefield and it's sane. There's going to be games where you just cycle it for like 4 mana or 5 mana and make a instant speed blocker to eat an attacker or make a threat to attack down a planeswalker or whatever. It's really hard for it to be bad. I mean, even the floor of just 2 mana cycle it, not even get a shark, it's not really the end of the world. Like, well, a lot of cards are 2 mana cycling. And then I feel like this is another card that already has some homes built in, like Wilderness Reclamation decks. This seems to do exactly what they want. And because as cycling kind of gives you a way to get around the Teferi effect, as you mentioned, you can even do the same tricks where you float all your mana and just make a really massive shark. So I feel like it has ready built homes. And I had a lot of success with Metallurgic summonings, which is very similar, except this does cost 1 more mana, but you get an upgrade to all your creatures having flying, and it's not a dead card in the early game because you can cycle it away. So I feel like Shark Typhoon has potential kind of across archetypes outside of aggro. Like control decks could play it as a finisher. You have like the combo-y Wilderness Reclamation decks that could play it. There's a lot of places that this card can show up, and the flexibility just really makes it possible.
Correct. And we've already seen how dominant Teferi has been on this Standard format. Now you have something that picks Teferi off. I kind of like a lot like how Teferi single-handedly almost pushed a ton of counterspells out of the way. If this card becomes like a 4 of in any blue deck, like, cause before your game plan was just to resolve Teferi, you like auto win against Flash, Control, and Teamer Energy, or Teamer Reclamation. That's no longer the case anymore. Teferi is not an auto win pretty much.
Let's move on to number 3 on our list, and we got a real simple one here. Mythos of Nethroi. Well, it's not worded simply,
yeah, the
but
wording
the
confused
effect
me.
is pretty simple. So, better murder for 3 mana, 2 and a black, destroy a creature, unless you pay green, white, and black, so abs and mana, then you can blow up any non-land permanent instant speed. Crim, what do you think about this one?
Just solid removal. I mean, like, it's straight up just an instant speed way to like vindicate something. I love it.
Yeah, I think we're in a Standard, kind of like when I talked about the Ultimatum, that really values having less conditional removal, just because we have a format where there's decks built around powerful artifacts, there's decks built around powerful enchantments, powerful planeswalkers, powerful creatures. So being able to get any non-land permanent is a massive upside. Like, you're playing cards specifically to be able to answer Fires of Invention, Wilderness Reclamation, Witch's Oven in your sideboard, and Mythos just does all of it, all by itself. So I feel like this is a reason, maybe the reason to build an Abzan deck. Just being able to hit anything for a low cost and instant speed is really strong.
Agreed.
Let's move on. Number 2 on our list. We got more Flash stuff. Crim, you love these Flash cards. Sea Dasher Octopus. I want to love this card, but it reminds me of like a better Curious Obsession, and I hate Curious Obsession. What do you think about the Octopus, Crim?
This is, just like you had mentioned, a better Curious Obsession. I mean, I don't know how you hate that card. It says draw a card on it. And like the thing here is, with the Flash archetype, whether it's Sultai, Simic, Dimir, this card does work. It now makes it so like on turn 1, I really want to have that Spectral Sailor, right? That, because like decks weren't playing Spectral Sailor as much, but because they didn't care for the 1-drop, right? But now you have this to follow up, and the fact that this is Flash, this is just an efficient card. It's nothing. It is technically flashy, but it's not at the same time. I think this is just a solid, good card advantage engine, and you can equip it to whatever threat, and I love that.
Yeah, the flexibility of this is what makes it, again, like we've seen Ophidian effects in the past, your 3-mana blue creatures that if you hit your opponent, you get to draw a card, but this does so much more because it's also essentially like an aura that you can mutate onto something that's already attacking. So if you have that evasive threat, you can put it on it. So this card, I think obviously Flash decks are an easy home, but I think there could be other creature decks, maybe like blue-white flying style decks that are playing this mostly as a Curious Obsession. And if there's one thing we learned a year ago in Standard, it's that sticking an effect like Sea Dasher Octopus on a flying creature and just getting an attack every turn, that's a way to snowball and win games. Like, that was very powerful with a Curious Obsession, and Sea Dasher Octopus can do the same thing and much, much more.
Correct. And who knows, maybe it becomes relevant, but if like with Theros, devotion matters, this is 2 blue pips, so who knows?
Let's move on to the very top card on our list, and I still am struggling to understand why this card was printed. Titan's Nest, the Sultai member of the enchantment cycle, can potentially add a little bit of mana, let's say, turning all of our cards, except X spells and colored spells, into delve cards, more or less, and letting us surveil every turn. Crim, what are you doing with Titan's Nest in Standard?
I mean, I don't know what I can't do. I mean, like, outside of like play an X spell and a colorless spell, but like, this is amazing. Like, you can just keep exiling cards and keep adding colorless. I don't know how we feel. Like, every time we've had a delve card, you know what I mean? It's been absurdly broken. I just don't know what else we could really talk about. I mean, on top of that, it surveils, sure. Like, the only downside is that it does not immediately deal with, like, if you're behind on board and then you play this enchantment on turn 4, you're not really doing anything, right? You essentially just skipped your turn 4. But like, the ability to just add that color, that free mana, is insane. Absolutely absurd.
Yes. And the other reason I think that I'm especially excited for this card right now. Like, everything you said is true. Delve is a busted mechanic. This gets all for your stuff. Delve, we have a pretty strong recent history of 4-mana ramp enchantments being really good. Wilderness Reclamation, Fires of Invention, which are essentially ramping in their own unique way. That's another reason I'm hyped for it. The big reason, though, on top of those things, is we already have decks that are stocking the graveyard really consistently. Even in these colors, we have decks that are playing Cavalier of Thorns. We have Uro decks that are using like Tamios to stock the graveyard. So it doesn't seem like a huge stretch to me that there will be decks that can easily have an extra 5-10 cards in their graveyard, and then all of a sudden you like play this and cast a Agent of Treachery for 2 mana or something like that, and just like yoink your opponent's best thing, or like a Liliana Dreadhorde General for 2 mana. Like, the value is so immense once it gets going. So I feel like this card really frightens me. Out of all the cards on the list that we talked about today, many of them are very good, and I expect them to see a lot of play. This is a card that I have a little bit of fear could be actually like broken in Standard. If there's a card that we're all like, oh my god, I wish they didn't print this, why do I gotta play against it again? I think Titan's Nest is the most likely card for Standard on the list.
I mean, they put ley lines in the core set for a reason. Maybe this is the card now where it's just mandatory that we play ley lines. Because we were already kind of dancing around it, right? With Cat, all that stuff. This just really nudges us in that direction. Like, I mean, It's weird because like this card, I feel like the older the format, its power kind of like, dwindles a little bit for me, but in standard, I think this is just absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, I think it definitely deserves to come in at the top of our best Ikoria cards for standard list.
Agreed.
Anyway, everyone, I think that brings us to the end for today. So those have been our top 10 Ikoria cards for standard. So let us know what you think. What card are you most hyped about from Ikoria for standard? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see our full list, make sure to check out the article on the site. So, Crim, thanks for hanging out and doing it. It's always a blast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to everyone for watching, and we will be back soon to talk about Ikoria in more formats. So until then, we will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.